Okay. All right, friends. Welcome to the Friends with Ryan segment, where friends both old and new come to join me and talk about sports. And we're going to start things off today with on episode 58. I've got with me Coach Jeff Reinebold. He has been in coaching for a very long time, but he's a guy who's young at heart, and I'm happy to have him on No Crutches Required. So, Coach Jeff Reinebold, Coach, how we doing tonight?
Ryan, I'm doing outstanding. When you said 5 decades, I said I was just about ready to come back and say, yeah, well, we broke some child labor laws when I got started, but I've been really, really blessed to have an opportunity to be in coaching as long as I've been, and it's been an amazing journey.
So we're talking kind of, well, I guess you could say backstage virtually, but where
hmm
where where are you currently?
I'm in London, England, and
Okay.
which is kind of a funny deal. And as we go through this, I think you're going to find. I hope you don't have any preconceived notions that I had this thing figured out and I knew what I was doing, because guys, a lot of times I'll run into young coaches and, they're like
Mhm.
I was at one point, and you're trying to find out, how you can do this or how you can do that or whatever. And, and I tell them, I say, hey, listen, first of all, don't ever take me as like you don't want to do it the way I did it. And they go, well, what do you mean, coach? And I said, well, to be honest with you, Mao Zedong had a 5-year plan. I didn't know 5 weeks from right now what I was doing. And it just kind of,
I don't think any of us know what we're doing 5 weeks from now.
well, you know what? It's crazy. I think that when you're young,
Mhm.
you go through that indoctrination that you get in college and your parents and all of it. And I had wonderful parents, but
Mhm.
I, the expectations that you got to have it figured out when you're 24 years old, and you
Yeah.
got to be on the path. And like I didn't even know what the path was. just I was just going, and you know I think now I look at my life and I've been just so blessed and so fortunate, and
Mhm.
so much to be grateful for. And really it's all about, in every at every turn, it's all about people.
Mhm. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. So let's go to in my questions here. So you got into coaching, and who's a person that you credit with getting you into coaching? And was it a difficult transition from player to coach?
Well, I think they're, now I'm going to give you my dime store psychology on this deal, right?
Mhm.
So, my father was a lifetime coach, right?
Mhm.
Um, he played basketball and uh, baseball in college in Mississippi, and
Mhm.
then came north and began his coaching career, and ended up being the winningest high school baseball coach in Indiana
Oh wow.
baseball history at the time.
Okay.
And by sheer circumstance, or fate, or however you describe it, he had won the
Mhm.
1970 Indiana State Championship, and was asked to speak at a clinic in up in the what we call the region, which is up by Gary, Laporte,
Okay.
up in there. And at that banquet, at this clinic, Charlie O'Finley, who was the owner of the Oakland A's at the time, or Kansas City A's at the time, I think, or Oakland, I can't remember which, but he owned
Mhm.
the A's. And he was a Laporte, Indiana guy. And he was
Mhm.
there to lend support to this clinic and this banquet. And my father presented, and apparently Mr. Finley was pretty impressed by my dad, because it was about 6 weeks later, we were home one evening and we had 5 kids, and dinner time in our house was sacred family time, and you did not answer the phone if it rang, right? And
Right.
but
Yep.
this evening my mother was up at the stove, which was over by the phone, and the phone rang, and she just reacted and picked it up and answered it.
Hmm.
And she said hello, and then she looked at my dad and she said, Jim, Charlie Finley's on the phone. He would like to speak with you. Well, my mother didn't. My mother, honest, Ryan, my mother didn't even know who Charlie Finley was, right? And
she's
my
being she's being polite. And it's like
yeah, I
this
mean, she
gentleman's
was
on the
just
phone
like,
for you.
"This is Charlie Finley." Like it could have been Charlie Finley, the insurance agent, right? It was like
Yeah.
so he gets this kind of funny look on his face and laughs, and he grabs the phone. And he had a friend, Jim Gibbons, and he and Jim
Hmm.
Gibbons used to always, as we say in England, take the Mickey out of one another.
Yep. Yep.
And so he gets on the phone and he goes, "Ah ha ha, Gib, yeah, I'll call you back later after dinner," right? And then all of a sudden his face went blank, and he kind of went, "Oh, Mr. Finley, I'm sorry." And it was really Charlie Finley. And what had happened was that his A-League manager, something had happened to his wife, and he couldn't. He needed to be with his wife, and he couldn't coach that season.
Hmm.
The A-ball team in Coos Bay, Oregon. And
Oh wow.
so my dad, as a high school coach, got a break and got a chance to coach the Coos Bay A's,
Huh.
and which is the Class A lowest rung on the totem pole minor
Hmm.
league team for the Oakland A's. And he parlayed that into 30 some years in professional baseball.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I kind of grew up in a coaching family, dugout to
Hmm.
dugout. And then I went on to college, and, I went to the University of Maine to play both baseball and football,
Okay.
and was probably a better baseball player, probably, if I think back on it now. But my heart was football. I loved football. I from the
Hmm.
first time I was introduced to the game, I loved it. And so after my freshman year, I called my dad and I said, "Dad, I think I want to give up baseball." And I think it hurt him a little bit, right? Because he was
Hmm.
a baseball guy.
Yeah.
But I remember being and Maine had a great baseball team. They just been to the College World Series the year before. And I was playing as a freshman, but I was, watching the guys go out to spring football.
Hmm.
And I identified with the football guys. I wasn't a baseball guy, right? I played
Right.
baseball, but I wasn't a baseball guy.
Hmm.
Anyway, so it just was in my heart. I couldn't dedicate. I was always looking over at the football field, right?
Hmm.
And so he kind of, he was, my father was a wonderful man, and he never said, "No, I don't want you to stop playing," but I knew it hurt him, right?
Yeah.
And so I played my college career. I played for a tremendous guy. I mean, like I said, it's always been about people in my life that have pointed me in the right direction. And I played
Hmm.
for a guy named Jack Bicknell.
Yeah. He coached at Boston. That was right before he went to Boston College, right?
Yeah, and he had Doug
Yeah.
Flutie at Boston College. Then he went
Hmm.
on and
Yep.
coached in pro football and all that stuff. Jack was a wonderful person. He's a great football coach, but he's a way better guy.
Hmm.
And my senior year, and I was not, Ryan, a particularly well. Uh, I don't know what I was, but I was like one of those kids that didn't think it was going to ever end, right?
Hmm.
And he pulled me into his office. I was walking by his office one day late in my senior year, my senior season, and he said, "Jeffrey, get in here." And there's only two people that have ever called me Jeffrey: my mother when she was mad at me, and Jack when he was mad at me. And I'm thinking, "Oh boy, what did I do now? Did I miss class this week, or what did I do?" And he said, "What are you going to do when this is over?"
Hmm.
And Ryan, I was like, "Huh?"
Yeah.
I mean, like, "Huh?" And he goes, "This is going to end in 6 weeks. You're done. You're not going to play professional football."
Hmm.
And I was heartbroken. I mean, I was
Hmm.
heartbroken. And I was like, I couldn't I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that this was going to end, right? Because
Hmm.
there was always another game, there was always another league, there was always the next step. It was always that. And he said to me at that point, he said, "I think you should coach. I think you would be a good coach."
Hmm.
And I went home and I called my dad and I said, "Dad, I think I know what I want to do."
Hmm.
And I was like, he says, "Well, that's a good idea. It's like you've been in college for 5 years." And and I said, "I think I want to coach." And Ryan, there
Hmm.
was dead silence on the phone.
Oh
Like
no.
it might have been 5 seconds, but it felt like 30 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Like he didn't say a thing. Then all of a sudden he said, "Now, son, I want you to understand. There's no money in it. There's no security. It's
Hmm.
hard on families.
Yeah.
I mean, he went through everything that was wrong with the profession, right? Or
Yeah.
hard about the profession. But
Hmm.
what he was doing, I learned now, looking back on it now, what he was doing was being a good father,
Hmm.
because the truth about coaching is you got to be all in. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not a profession, and I don't think any profession is really, but it's not a profession particularly that you can be kind of halfway in. It, it,
Hmm.
it really needs all of you. And then, you know, I went back and I saw Jack and I said, Coach, I'd like to try. And he
Hmm.
said, well, this is now he's getting ready to leave to go to Boston College. He said, I'm going to go to the Boston College and I could take you as a graduate assistant, but I don't think that's good for you.
Hmm.
And he he reached on his bookshelf and pulled his book over and threw it at me across the desk. And he said, that's the college book of athletics, blue book of college athletics. He said, it's got the name and address of every head football coach in America. You need to find yourself a job and go out and create he said, this is a contact oriented business and you need to get away from us because you can always come home, but you need to create your own contacts and your
Hmm.
own thing. So I hand wrote like 75 letters, and I'm not kidding you, Ryan. 75. And
Wow.
it got to the point where I could pick them up out of my mailbox and know that they were no letters just by how much they weighed, right? Because
Hmm.
it was always one page and it was always the same thing. We appreciate your interest in the program at Virginia Tech. However, at this time, we did not have any openings. We'll keep your letter on file. I mean, I read
Hmm.
so many of them. It was all the same letter, right?
Oh man, this never
And,
ends.
and then like after like 50 some, 60 some no's, I get a letter back from New Mexico State
Hmm.
and a guy named Gil Krieger, and I've never met the man,
Hmm.
to say thank you, sent me the same letter, the same form letter, but
Hmm.
he had written over the top of it, Jeff, my offensive coordinator just took the Western Montana college job. He may need assistance, and he wrote Don Christensen's number on the
Hmm.
on the page. So
Okay.
I call, and now this is Western Montana. This isn't the university or Montana State. This is Western Montana. And I get in the blue book and I dig through the blue book and it's an NAIA school that has 800 students in it.
Oh
So
wow.
so I'm thinking, okay, well, it's someplace, right?
Yeah.
And I call him and we talk, and obviously they don't have the money to fly in for an interview or anything like that. So
Hmm.
he says, to be honest with you, an ex-quarterback of this school has wants to come be a GA, and we're always going to take care of our alumni first. So,
Hmm.
you know, thanks, but no thanks. So now I've been
Hmm.
through all these no's, and I got no other. Like I took the LSAT because my mom always said you should go be a lawyer, and I didn't want to do that. And the only other alternative I had, I was actually on my way to joining the Peace Corps and going to work in Africa.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then he called me back about 3 weeks later, and that guy's wife had gotten pregnant. And he said, Coach, I can't take the job because I can't, give up my coaching and teaching job to
Mhm.
come for the salary was $2,500 a year at
Oh
that time.
gosh.
And so that's how I got started. I mean, it's just dumb luck.
My goodness. It. I did watch last week's Rob Peterson show. You did mention you just kind of fall into things. It's an interesting way to fall into coaching. Man, that's crazy. Don't mind
Like I
my
said,
don't mind my
like I
don't mind
said,
my cat. He's just being.
no worries. Like I said, I mean, it is for a kid who has no more ability, no more smarts, no more. There's nothing unique about me, nothing special, nothing. I have no gifts. I've just been so fortunate along the way to run into such amazing people.
Mhm. So you go to college, you go into college coaching, and
Mhm.
you spend time with 5 NCAA teams, but you get the opportunity to coach in the CFL. Who was the coach that approached you about jumping up to Canada?
Okay, it's another one of those kind of stories. When when I was at the University of Montana as a young coach, it was my first full time job, and
Oh.
our head coach Larry Donovan at Montana had gone up, and in the CFL, they have small staffs, and this was typical of the times. They would bring American college coaches up to assist during training camp, and that
Mhm.
way they could, learn where the players were in the United States, and then they would also get coaches during camp. And and then Larry came back, and he had met a young defensive back coach. He was actually a defensive coordinator named Greg Newhouse,
Mhm.
and he brought Greg down to speak at a clinic that we put on at the University of Montana.
Okay.
And Greg and I we just hit it off. We were kind of like two peas in a pod.
Yeah.
And later on, I was coaching at Rocky Mountain College as the head coach, and Greg called me and he got the defensive coordinator job at New Mexico. And he said,
Mhm.
"Would you come and work with me at New Mexico?" So I went to New Mexico for a year. And during that time, that was when um, the old USFL started, right? And
Yep.
so Greg was our defensive coordinator. The BC Lion job opened in the CFL, and the head coach of the Lions tried to get Greg to come back up to Canada. And so
Okay.
during that process, they had a conversation apparently, and the head coach Bob Obilovich said to Greg, "Hey, I got to hire. I'm also going to have to hire a special teams guy, and I'm looking for a young guy that can coach another position. That'll come cheap, right?"
Mhm.
And so Greg mentioned me, and Bob called me, and he said, "I've got this job open. Are you interested?" I said, "Oh, coach, yeah, I'd love to coach in Canada in professional football." I was like
Mhm.
29, I think, at the time. And he said, "Have you ever coached special teams?" And I lied straight to him and said, "Yeah." And I hadn't coached a down of special teams. Not,
Oh
I'm
my
telling you,
gosh.
not a down. But I've had this, I've had this guardian angel in my career the whole time, and his name's Dick
Mhm.
Vermeil. And so
Ah.
I called Coach Vermeil, and I said, "Coach, I think I screwed up." And he's like, "What'd you do?" And he said, I said, I told this guy coach special teams, and and I think he's going to offer me the job." And coach said, "Okay, here's what you do. Call Lynn Stiles, who was with the 49ers at the time. And Lynn had been a
Mhm.
special teams coach with Coach Vermeil." He said, "And pick his brain. And then when you go in for the interview, just tell him everything that Lynn tells you." so, so Lynn Stiles helps me prepare, and I go and I get the job. And that's how it started in pro
Wow.
football.
That's crazy. That's crazy. So you spent you bounced around a bunch of teams, but you wound up having one of the most unique experiences of being
Mm-hmm.
a coach that was part of the CFL expansion effort into the United States. Can you tell us what that experience was in that 1 year in Las Vegas with the Las Vegas posse?
I am gonna when I'm done coaching, I'm gonna write a book, and at least at least half of the book is gonna be, maybe the whole book will be about Las Vegas, but
Oh my
it'll be
gosh.
that experience, because what had happened, so people get a kind of a historical context. What
Mhm.
had happened was the CFL had gone through a really, really difficult time financially, and was
Mhm.
really on its last legs, on its
Yep.
deathbed. And Pat Bolin, who is the owner of the was the owner of the Broncos at that time, is an
Mhm.
Edmonton, Alberta native.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
he was close with Hugh Campbell, who was the general manager of the Eskimos and had been a great head coach for the Eskimos when they won
Mhm.
5 straight Grey Cups.
Yep.
they engineered a deal where the National Football League would give each Canadian franchise, I think at that time it was like $1 million,
Yep.
if the CFL would open our free, like your option year in a CFL contract. Let's say you play, if I put you under contract for 2 and an option, the
Hmm.
third, that option year, it's the club's option. But what the NFL wanted was the rights to any CFL player in his option year without restriction, right? Because
Okay. Hmm.
there was an agreement between the two leagues that they wouldn't take players under contract from
Hmm.
one another. Well, that 500 or $1 million that they gave all the franchise kept the league alive. And then it also, they needed to find a new revenue stream. So
Hmm.
what they did was they sold franchises into the United States because the NFL was not going to expand. And there were a number of rich guys, but they weren't rich enough for the NFL. They didn't have
Right.
enough money to buy a franchise in the NFL.
Hmm.
And there were none for sale at the time anyway. So Sacramento came into the league, Baltimore came into the league, Birmingham came into the league, Shreveport
Hmm.
came into the league, San Antonio came into the league, and Las Vegas came into the league.
Okay.
So a friend of mine calls me and he says, I'm going to take a job in Las Vegas with this team called the Posse.
Hmm.
And I said, oh, that's great, man. That's awesome. And he goes, how'd you like to come? And I thought, Vegas?
Hmm.
Not, nah.
There you go.
All right. All right. So then I said, who's going to be the head coach? And he said, Ron Meyer. And I went,
SMU.
I'm in. I said, I'm in. Right. Because as a kid, you know, like as I was leaving college, SMU was just becoming the Pony Express,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
Dickerson and James,
Yep.
Jerry Ball. I mean, they were unbelievable.
Yep.
And Meyer was such a, like charismatic figure, right?
Yep.
And the amazing thing is that Ron had actually been a high school coach at our arch rival high school.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I mean he played at Purdue. He's from
Hmm.
Ohio. He played at Purdue
Okay.
and then became a high school coach at Penn High School in just outside of South Bend. And Penn and Clay were my high school were the bitter rivals, right?
Oh wow. Okay.
So I knew of this guy, right, and his slick back hair, and he was the guy that brought the snow machine on the field, the snowblower on the field to clear a place so they could kick a field goal in the playoffs
Yep.
in the end. I mean,
Hmm.
like, and I said, I got to work with this guy. And I went down there, and Ryan, he was the best. I mean, he was he was awesome, like
Hmm.
awesome. And I was the youngest guy on the staff, and so he called me the kid. So he go, "Hey,
Yep.
kid," and Ron had a big Cadillac, and so he used to say to me, he goes, "Kid, you should never drive if you can be driven." And so I was his driver, right? So Ryan, he'd come by my office and he'd go, "Kid, let's go." I said, "Coach, I got a scouting report." "Kid, let's go." And wherever we, so the first goofy experience I have with him is he comes into my office and he goes, "Kid, let's go." I said, "Where are we going, Coach?" He goes, "I'm going to show you our practice facility." Well, I'd only been in Vegas for like 3 weeks, right?
Hmm.
And I hadn't seen anything other than the Strip and the office,
Okay.
because the office was on Flamingo Road right off the Strip. And
Hmm.
so he drives down the street. I'm driving down the Strip, taking directions the whole way, right, left, like. So we get to the Riviera Hotel, which is right on the Strip. And he goes, "Pull in, kid." So I pull in and he goes, "Go around back." And I go around the back of the Riviera Hotel, and there's this big parking lot, like at a stadium, big
Hmm.
asphalt parking lot with all the yellow lines on it. And
Yep.
he goes, "What do you think, kid?" And I go, Of what? And he goes, that's our practice facility. And I go,
Huh?
Ron, there's no goalpost, there's no grass. He goes, kid, this is Vegas. Things happen in Vegas, right? So I go, what? And he goes, so then he tells me what they, and honest to God, they did this. This is so goofy. But in the next 2 weeks, they took a bunch of 2x8s and they basically built like the world's biggest sandbox. And they
Hmm.
put black dirt down. Then they
Mhm.
laid sod over the top of it, brought in some temporary bleachers. And that's where we would practice during training camp because the Riviera became our team hotel, right? So
Okay.
our guys are going down the elevators to go out to practice with their helmets and shoulder pads on. And there's, Mom and Pop Smith from Paducah, Kentucky, going down to play the slots on the same. It was bizarre. Like, it was like completely mad. And if you went to the to the casino, they would
Mhm.
give you a chit for like a gin and tonic or something, and you could go
Mhm.
out and watch us practice in the
Wow.
in the like in the middle of the day in Las Vegas in July, and it's like
Oh.
113 outside. But
Oh.
it was just like that's what life was like in Vegas. And at that time I was riding a motorcycle. So and that was my only form of or transportation. So I'm
Mhm.
driving this motorcycle and driving Ron's Cadillac. And I'll tell you one more Ron Meyer story, because this one's like, and I swear this is true. We practiced. Our offices were on Flamingo Road, and if you know Vegas at all,
Mhm.
Flamingo extends a long way, and then the University of Nevada, Las Vegas football field is out of the town. It's not in town. It's outside the old
Right.
field that they played at that time.
Okay.
They play in the Raiders facility now, but so
Mhm.
that's where we practiced. We had fields out there, and that's where we practiced. So it would take you 25 minutes to get out to practice. Well, one day we're getting ready, preparing to go to practice, doing our practice scripts and all that stuff. And,
Mhm.
we're all in our coaching gear. And Ron, Ron walks in my office and he goes, "Let's go, kid." And I said, "Coach, I'm just about, let me get my practice script. Come on, kid, we got to go." So I gather up my stuff and we get in the car and I'm driving him out to practice. And on Flamingo Road, there's a casino, kind of a local casino called Sam's Town.
Mhm.
And we're driving past Sam's Town and he goes, "Kid, pull in." And I go, "Ron, don't we got to go to practice?" I said, "Kid, pull in." So I pull in, right? And he goes, "I feel lucky, kid." And I'm like, "Ron, what about practice?" And he goes, "Come on." And I swear, Ryan, I swear this is true. We go into the casino, and Ron loved craps. I mean, he
Mhm.
loved craps. So we get to the crap table, and here are all these people on holiday or whatever they're doing, right?
Mhm.
At the crap table, and two guys in shorts and coaching shoes at the other end of the crap table. And
Oh no.
he starts throwing dice and winning,
Oh
right?
my.
And winning. And so in Vegas, when anybody gets hot on the table, like, people
Mhm.
will come to the table and kind of watch, right?
Yeah.
And so Ron, he used to say things like, he told me, this is one of the other things he told me. He goes, "Kid, never just show up when you can make an appearance." And so, like, so he had this big personality, and he's got this hair slicked back, and he's all
Mhm.
suntanned, and he's in his coaching gear, and he's rolling and winning and rolling and winning, and the chips are starting to pile up, right?
Oh my.
But I'm looking at my watch, and it's now we're late for practice,
Oh
right?
my gosh.
And I said, "Coach, you know, it's we're 5 minutes late already. We still got to get to." He looked at me and he goes, "Kid, what do they do for the first 15 minutes of practice? What's on your practice schedule?" And I said, "Well, stretch." And he
Yeah.
goes, do you think we need to be there for stretch? If they can't stretch by themselves, then we got the wrong guys. And he took the dice and threw another and threw another. And then finally he started to crap out.
Yeah.
And he gathered all his chips in, gave them to me. I went to the casino and I took his money back to him. We got in the
Mhm.
car, drove to practice. And Ryan, he went on the practice field as if absolutely nothing had happened. He just went immediately into coaching mode. And it's like, I'm standing there completely stupefied
Oh my
on,
gosh.
but he was something.
Now, before I go on to my next question, Las Vegas has a quarterback who they grab a quarterback who later becomes the all-time leader in passing, all-time leader in touchdowns in the CFL, passing touchdowns, Anthony Calvillo. Now, how do you feel as a coach? You're coming back to Montreal Alouettes as a special teams coordinator. He joined the team a few weeks ago as a quarterbacks coach. What's it, I mean, what's it going to be like the first day you walk in and there's AC? What's it going to be like?
Well, I tell you, this is how crazy life is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was there in Las Vegas on the staff when we got AC from Utah State, right?
Yep.
And he
Mm-hmm.
was a skinny kid out of LA that weighed probably 185, 190 pounds, 6'1", and he had kind of like a whip of an arm. And he got the ever living dog stew knocked out of him that year. I
Oh.
mean, he got pummeled, right?
Mm-hmm.
We weren't very good, and we got worse as the team started to disintegrate and
Mm-hmm.
ownership disintegrated. And I thought, frankly, that he'd never recover from it. And
Hmm.
then, as fate would have it, in 2012, I went to Montreal as the defensive coordinator for
Mm-hmm.
Anthony's last year in pro
Oh
football.
wow.
So
Oh
I
wow.
saw his first season and his last season. And now we're
Wow.
going to get a chance to coach together. I'm really looking forward to it because he really, really was a not only a great player, he was great for the game in Canada. He
Mm-hmm.
he really was tremendous with the fans, tremendous with the media, all of it. He was a professional in every way you could define that word.
If I understand, he's even better man off the field. Good, great husband, great father. Just
Yep.
an absolutely great guy all around.
Yeah, he's no question about it. And then, we've got a young quarterback, Vernon Adams, who
Mm-hmm.
played at Oregon and is really a talented young guy. We're kind of this new wave of quarterback, got great feet, can do a million things with it, outside the pocket. And I think Anthony's going to be really good for him because Anthony's got
Mm-hmm.
such a great knowledge of the game after throwing for all those yards. I mean, he's thrown for not yards, he's thrown for miles.
Miles. Yeah. Crazy. 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 So let's go transition to my next set of questions. You keep going around the CFL, and then you get heavily involved in NFL Europe and as a
Mm-hmm.
jack of all trades. You do everything from being an assistant to being a head coach, and then you eventually become senior manager of international player development. Did
Mm-hmm.
you consider yourself kind of a football missionary in order to try to win fans to the football fans, basically a new audience in Europe?
Well, I tell you, there's two things about that. You said did a little bit of everything. I think
Jack of all trades.
yeah. My dad told me one time. He says, "Guy that does a little bit of everything means he probably can't do much of anything." Right? So maybe that was the case. But to be honest with you, like the reason I come over and do this
Hmm.
broadcasting in the UK
Yeah.
is there's nothing that I enjoy more than seeing a young player get better. The next thing about this business that makes my heart beat is watching people fall in love with the game that I fell in love with as a kid.
Hmm.
And if I can
Okay.
help facilitate that in some way, whether it's an international player program, it's like football missionary. Yeah, that's probably the way to say it.
Hmm.
Because this game Ryan, this game for a kid from South Bend, Indiana, who, like, I first fell in love with football in 1966 is the first game I can remember. Michigan State against Notre Dame, the 10-10 tie.
Yep.
And we lived so close to Notre Dame Stadium that when Notre Dame would score a touchdown, you could hear the crowd and the band would play. And
Wow.
so we would play as kids in our front yard when Notre Dame was playing and pretend that the band and the crowd was cheering for us, you
Hmm.
know? And so
Yeah.
the game has been so good to me and my family and everybody that I know that, you know, you really would like to see everybody have that experience with football.
Mm-hmm. And that's why you're doing your thing in the UK with Sky Sports. You've been to NFL. You're in NFL Europe for a long time. That's yeah. I totally get it in terms of the sport. You know, I'm a big football guy. I'm also a big hockey guy. I
Mm-hmm.
also dip a little bit into rugby too. So you know, I played rugby for a hot minute back in 2011. But yeah, I could definitely see how you just want to see others fall in love with the game that you enjoy, and I could definitely see that, and that's why you went over there. That's yeah,
Well,
that's perfect.
the one of the things that was really the coolest, couple of the coolest things that I've ever been able to be a part of was when Tony Allen was my boss in the NFL, and
Hmm.
the NFL put together there was a tournament at the Super Bowl. It was called the Global Junior Championships, and they
Hmm.
brought teams from Canada, the United States, Panama, Mexico,
Wow.
Japan, and they brought a European team. And
Hmm.
Tony asked me to coach on the European team.
Okay.
And we went there a couple years and played all those other teams. And one of the kids that we had off that team was a big, skinny German offensive tackle that we got out of the swimming pool. He was a swimmer, and we
Hmm.
convinced him to try football.
Okay.
And that kid ended up protecting Tom Brady in 3 Super Bowls and won 2 Super Bowl rings.
Oh wow.
His name was Sebastian Vollmer, and
Okay.
Sebastian is now,
Yep.
you know, a hugely successful business guy and author, and so to see that kind of experience, to watch
Mhm.
that kid go from being just this wide-eyed, skinny 6'6" kid that didn't know if a football had air or feathers in it to becoming an NFL player, man, that was a really, really beautiful thing.
That's cool. That's really really cool. All right, so I'm going to transition into my next question. After NFL Europe, you kind of wandered throughout the NCAA again with Louisiana
Hmm.
Tech, Hawaii, SMU, and you were part of the coaching staff during two really special seasons.
Hmm.
Hawaii Sugar Bowl appearance in 2008, and then the next year, SMU's first bowl win in 25 years.
Yep.
What was it like to be a coach? What was it like to be part of both coaching staffs during those 2 seasons?
Well, I think the highlight of both those 2 seasons was having the opportunity to work for June Jones.
Yep.
And I don't know if you know June or know of June, but June
Yep.
Jones is really a unique person and
Yes, absolutely.
one
Yeah.
of the really good guys in our business.
Hmm.
And he had gone, June's story, he had played high school football in Portland, went to the University of Oregon, and in that same recruiting class, there was another quarterback in town on campus named Dan Fouts.
Yep.
Well, June figured out pretty fast that he wasn't going to play very much at the University of Oregon. So he left and went to the University of Hawaii, where
Okay.
his high school best friend had gone to play basketball.
Hmm.
So he plays football at Hawaii for 3 years and really doesn't play a lot, but um, they have a coaching change and they go from a passing offense to the wishbone, and
Hmm.
June ain't a wishbone quarterback. So he leaves and goes back home to Portland. And Mouse Davis was the head coach at Portland State at the time. And he heard June was in town.
Mhm.
And he tried to get June to come out at Portland State. June said, "No, I'm done with football. I'm just going to go into the business world with my dad." But Mouse being Mouse wouldn't say no, and it wouldn't take no for an answer. And he ended up, this is crazy, but he ended up getting June a fifth year before fifth year was available. He actually broke the rules to get June
Oh, wow.
the chance to play quarterback. And June ended up going and making the Falcons as a free agent and then got into coaching. But he never lost his love for the University of Hawaii. So he's on the Charger staff with Kevin Gilbride. Gilbride gets fired. They make June the head coach.
Yep.
And the Hawaii job opens. And June leaves the Chargers to go back to Hawaii because the program was in such disarray. He proceeds to create the biggest turnaround in college football history. They go from 0-11 to they beat Oregon State in a bowl game the next year.
Yep.
And has a great run at Hawaii. And culminates that in the 12-0 Sugar Bowl season that we had in 2007. And then because of his associate, this is how the world works. This is so important that kids hear these kind of stories because this is why I say it's so important how you treat people, because and you don't treat people for this reason, but you treat people, if you treat people correctly and well, it always brings something back good, right? It's just that the karmic law, right? So anyway, June's the head coach in Atlanta, and they trade for a over the hill, beat up Eric Dickerson. And Eric comes to training camp the next year, and June's the head coach, and they're going to cut him, right? He's done.
Right.
This is a Hall of Fame player now, right?
Yeah.
So June calls Dick in and he says, "Eric, we're going to cut you tomorrow. If you want, you can retire and go out with your head held up high, right? And we'll make it a retirement. We won't cut you."
Right.
Eric never forgot that, being treated that way. And so after we won after we beat Washington and we're going to the Sugar Bowl, Eric called June and he said, "June, would you come back and save SMU?" Because Eric has always been loved SMU. And that's how we ended up all going to SMU. And then we turned that around the second year we beat Colin Kaepernick and the University of Nevada in the Hawaii Bowl. So amazingly. And so, yeah, that experience working for June Jones was, that was 8 years of the best time in my life in coaching.
Is June Jones as good as good a man off the field as he on the field? Is he? I mean, is he
Better.
a great guy? Better. Okay.
And you know what? There are a lot of guys in this business that, can sell ice to Eskimos, right? There are a lot of guys. There are a lot of guys that are full of it, right?
Yep.
There are very few guys that what they do and what they say are the same things, and that's June Jones.
All right. So I got 3 more questions for you, Coach, and then I'll let you retire to your abode in UK. So following the 2011 season at SMU, you returned to the CFL as a defensive coordinator for Montreal, as you kind of mentioned. But throughout your career, you've worn a lot of hats, but you've primarily been a special teams coordinator. You kind of dove into that, but we kind of know what an offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator does. But could you take the audience through the responsibility of what a special teams coach does?
Well, same thing when I speak at clinics, a lot of times the special teams guy particularly in places where they don't really understand football, will be a guy that's just kind of a fill-in job. They kind of like give
Hmm.
it to who it. Nobody wants to do it, right?
Right.
Because we always say this as a group. When I talk to our guys, our kids, our players, I said, if you want credit, go to the bank, because you ain't gonna get any credit for what you do here. It's just not doesn't work that way, right? And so it's a thankless job in a lot of ways, but to me, it's the best job it's the best coaching job on the staff, right?
Okay.
Because you have an opportunity as a special teams guy to work with every player on the football team. You're the only one that gets a
Hmm.
chance to do that other than the head coach. The defensive coordinator, he can work with every defensive kid, but he doesn't work with the offensive guys. The
Hmm.
offensive coordinator, the same.
Yep.
But the special teams coach, he works with every position group, every player. And so it really gives you an opportunity to create a relationship throughout the football program and throughout the organization. And what you see as you get up into higher levels of football is it's really a critical position,
Hmm.
because you are going to reinforce. And this is one of the things I say to young special teams coaches when I do speaking engagements, is you have to understand how important your job is in relation to the success of the football team, because you are the one, other than the head coach, you're the only one that will stand in front of the entire team.
Hmm.
And your message has to be exactly dovetailed off of the head coach's message, right? And so it is a lot of hats. It's part lion tamer, part psychiatrist, part psychologist, part disciplinarian, part, because no kid, and I say this again when I do speaking, is that I've been in this on a professional level for 30 years. One guy hand me his football card, and on it says right guard on the punt team. It's going to say, you know, Jimmy Jones linebacker, or Jimmy Jones tight end, or what. They don't see themselves that's not their identity. They see themselves as every down players. But somehow you've got to get that kid to identify with that job and do it at a high level, so that the guy who's playing the position he wants to play has a better chance to succeed. Now, that's contraindicated for a human being. That's the first place where it's different. And then, second of all, you got to say to him, this job that you have to do, nobody's
Hmm.
going to ever say thank you for it. You're
Hmm.
never going to get your name in the paper unless you screw it up.
Right.
And it's a highly dangerous job, because you're talking about
Hmm.
collisions that are sometimes 40 or 60 yards of running, and then there's a collision.
Yeah.
you know, if you're playing right guard and you're hitting the guy that's the defensive tackle across from you, he's maybe a yard away from you. If I'm
Hmm.
going to break up the wedge, I got to run 60 yards full speed into a guy that's bigger than me running 40 yards at me full speed. Now, I'm
Oof.
not a physics guy, but there's not a lot of future in that.
No.
So,
No.
so it's a really, really unique position on the staff. And
Hmm.
it's something that I frankly love. I truly enjoy it.
Uh, my second to last question here. It says, in addition to your special coach teams coach duties in the CFL, you're also an NFL analyst with Sky Sports UK.
Mhm.
Who approached you about that role? And I know you say you kind of fall over your career, you've kind of, I don't say fall into things, but how did you get involved with Sky Sports and to be an NFL analyst?
All right, just not just another one of those deals. Is like I was head coach in Winnipeg. I had gotten fired
Mhm.
in the middle of the season, right towards the end of the season, and some of the media guys in Canada asked me. They said, "Would you be interested in doing some color commentating on some games, and then uh, there were two sports channels at that time in Canada, TSN and God, I can't remember what the other one was.
Is it Rogers Sportsnet?
Yeah, Sportsnet. And
Yep.
Sportsnet approached me about doing a thing called NFL News and Notes, which was like a 15-minute once a week show.
Okay.
And I did it, and I thought it was fun, and but I didn't take it. I mean, it wasn't like I thought this is going to be my career. So I leave, go to NFL Europe, and at that time, the NFL Europe games were broadcast on Fox, and Fox owned Sky.
Yep.
And Fox would use the NFL Europe games as a proving ground for young analysts. Aikman started there, Baldinger started there, Moose Johnson started there, Darren Woodson started there, all those guys.
Yep.
And so I think it was Woodson was supposed to come over and do a game. Something happened. He couldn't make it. Now, this is before internet and everything else, right? So it was like Friday, and the game was on the weekend. And, you got work visas you got to get done and travel and all kinds of stuff. So they couldn't get anybody in. And Alistair Kirkwood, who was the president of NFL Europe at the time, walked down to my office, knocked on the door, and he said, stuck his head in the door, and he goes, "Didn't you do some TV when you were in Canada?" I said, "Yeah, I did a little bit." He said, "Would you do me a favor? Would you sit in this weekend and do color on the NFL Europe broadcast for Sky?"
Oh, wow.
I said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And
okay.
Ryan, I prepared, but it wasn't like I was, oh my God, this is my audition, this is my chance, right? One of those deals.
I'm a gap filler, basically.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I'm a placeholder. Yeah. I'm gonna have fun with it, and hopefully somebody will enjoy it watching the game, right? So little did I know that one of the big wigs from Fox was in town. One of Rupert Murdoch's guys was in town that weekend in London, and he was in his hotel room, and he was just channel surfing and looking at all of the programming to get a feel for what the program. So they had and I didn't know this story till about 6 years later, but they had a production meeting, post-production meeting on Monday, which I wasn't a part of, just the producing people, the big shots, the people that know what they're doing. And he was going around the room, and he'd say, "Okay, I thought the Premiership, we need to do this, 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 and this, and netball and all the sports," right? And he gets to American football, and he goes, he looks at the producer, and he goes, "Who was that blonde-haired guy you had on?" And my producer went Simon Peter on me. He goes, "Hey, he was just a fill-in, because he thought he thought he was going to get his tail jumped, right?"
Yeah.
He was just a fill-in. I promise you that it just one time. That's you'll never see him again, right? And the guy goes, "Nah, I kind of like him. Bring him back."
Okay.
And that's how it got started.
Wow.
I never applied for the job. I have no training at it. I have nothing.
You didn't go to school for television production. You just like, hey, I'm here.
Nothing, right? Nothing. You know how much I know about a TV? Turning it on and turning it off. That's how much I know.
That's great. All right, and one last question. And Coach, I'm very appreciative and great, and that you take some time to talk this little podcast out in Saratoga, New York.
Stop it.
Spend some time with me. I do appreciate it. So the last question, you kind of dove into it a little bit a couple minutes ago, but I kind of want to ask you this question for any football player who's listening. If they're in college, if they're in high school, and they're thinking about going into coaching, what are some words of wisdom or advice you can provide from your many, many years of coaching experience?
I would say this. The first thing I would say, and this was said to me by Dick Vermeil, and it was repeated to every coach that ever coached for Coach Vermeil. It was in his coaching manual that he would hand out every year before you went to training camp. And it's the very essence of what coaching really is in my mind. And he said this: players don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Hmm.
And
I can hear his voice saying
yeah,
that too
and
when you
that
say that.
is so true. In this day and age, particularly, relational coaching is the most important thing for so many young players, men
Mhm.
and women in every sport. The relationship that they have with their coach, it will be one of the most significant relationships they have in their life. And to 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 illustrate that, I just did my podcast tonight, and I brought 4 guests on the show. Nick Ferguson played for me 3 different places.
Mhm.
Ryan Mouton, I recruited out of Texas to come to the University of Hawaii. Um, Kendall Gammon was a 9-year NFL vet when I met him and worked with him in training camp in the National Football League. And
Mhm.
Jesse Sapolo and I worked hand in hand with young players in American Samoa. Every one of those guys knows, and I know, that no matter what they needed, or no matter what if there was anything I could do to help them, all they had to do was let me know.
Mhm.
And I know the exact same thing from them. Those relationships are the most significant relationships in my life. Right?
Mhm.
My father's passed now. My
Mhm.
relationship with Coach Vermeil is as close as the relationship I have with my father.
Hmm.
Jack McNeil, all of the guys who touched my life, every player that I coach. I mean, it's it's so much bigger than wearing a whistle.
Mhm. Okay. All right. Well, Coach, I want to thank you again for being on the No Credentials Required podcast. This is your time to plug your stuff. Tell the people where you are in social media. Tell them about your podcast. The floor is yours, right, sir?
Well, I'm easy to find. If I'm uh, Jeff underscore Reinebold on Twitter. We have
Mm-hmm.
a podcast called Coffee with Coach. Um, you can find that on Twitter, Apple, all that stuff. I mean, I don't know all the
Yep.
platforms it's on because I don't do that stuff.
It's on all of them. Let's just say that.
You can catch me on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Um, obviously, you know, um, and I say that I'm just like, I, I coach for the Montreal Alouettes. If you want to get a hold of me, my email address is JREINEBOLD @hotmail.com. I will answer it. I just want to uh, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on your show, and understand that you know you're doing great work.
Thank you.
Great work. Not good
Thank
work.
you.
Great work.
Thank you, Coach. I really do appreciate that. And with that, well, this is the end of the Friends with Ryan segment. We'll be back in just a second.